Fantasy TV shows promise sprawling worlds, epic characters, and magic-filled storytelling. However, despite all the spectacle, many of them often rely on the same predictable tropes: the chosen one, the prophesied battle, and the endless cycle of good versus evil. While these stories are comforting to some, repetition can make even fantastical realms feel familiar to the point of dullness. Fortunately, there are plenty of series that break away from those well-worn patterns. For every story about a hero embarking on a preordained quest to save the realm, there's a bold alternative that challenges expectations. These shows dare to dive into morally grey characters, unconventional story structures, and narratives that reject the rigid formula most fantasy TV shows still cling to. Not only do these imaginative series provide a welcome change, but they also showcase the genre at its best. They're proof that fantasy thrives most when it dares to innovate. Instead of playing it safe, these shows redefine the boundaries of small-screen fantasy by embracing unique, boundary-pushing ideas. Disenchantment, 2018 to 2023. A medieval fantasy satire that mixes irreverence with sincerity. Princess Bean on the throne in Disenchantment. Matt Groening's Disenchantment brought his signature animated style into a new arena, medieval fantasy. Instead of epic quests and noble heroes, it follows Princess Bean, Abby Jacobson, a rebellious royal whose adventures involve alcohol, questionable choices, and a sardonic demon sidekick named Lucy Eric Andre. It quickly stood apart from fantasy TV shows that take themselves too seriously. Rather than mocking fantasy from the outside, the show deconstructs it from within. Bean's kingdom of dreamland is filled with recognizable tropes, evil sorcerers, curses, and magical creatures, but the narrative twists them into absurd, comedic, and occasionally heartbreaking directions. This gives Disenchantment a tonal balance that's rare in the genre. By fusing parody with genuine character development, the show carved its own niche. While some moments are slapstick, others explore loneliness, destiny, and rebellion against tradition. In blending satire with sincerity, Disenchantment proved fantasy could be funny, emotional, and inventive all at once. The Sandman, 2022 to 2025. A dreamlike fantasy that blends mythology with modern storytelling. Dream arrives in the dreaming in The Sandman. Neil Gaiman's The Sandman was long considered unfilmable, yet Netflix turned it into one of the most ambitious fantasy TV shows of recent years. Centering on Morpheus, Tomstridge, the Lord of Dreams, the show straddles both myth and modernity, crafting a narrative that feels as poetic as it does unsettling. Where traditional fantasy tends to hinge on battles for kingdoms, The Sandman explores humanity's relationship with dreams, stories, and inevitability. The show drifts through genres: horror, myth, family drama, with each episode offering a different angle on Morpheus's endless realm. This structure keeps it unpredictable and distinctly unbound by convention. Instead of leaning on a straightforward hero's journey, the story revels in moral ambiguity and existential stakes. By treating mythology with equal reverence and reinvention, The Sandman blurred the line between the mystical and the intimate, creating one of the most imaginative reinterpretations of fantasy on TV. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, 2018 to 2020. A dark coming-of-age tale that fused witchcraft with horror. Sabrina Spellman in The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina flipped the light-hearted tone of Sabrina the Teenage Witch into a darkly gothic horror fantasy. Kiernan Shipka's Sabrina Spellman wasn't just balancing school and spells, she was torn between her mortal life and the sinister pull of her witch heritage. This duality gave the show a uniquely intense identity. Where many fantasy TV shows lean on good versus evil binaries, Sabrina lived in grey areas. Satanic pacts, forbidden love, and questions of free will constantly challenged characters, giving the narrative moral complexity. By placing horror imagery at the heart of its storytelling, the show elevated the tension beyond typical magical hijinks. Though it delivered the expected fantasy elements, demons, rituals, spells, its tone was far more daring. Sabrina blended teen drama with occult mythologies in a way that felt fearless, pushing boundaries of what network-affiliated fantasy could look like. It made witchcraft feel dangerous again. The Magicians, 2015 to 2020. A fantasy series that constantly reinvented itself season by season. The central characters drinking a cocktail in The Magicians. At first glance, The Magicians looked like a darker version of Harry Potter, centering on Quentin Coldwater, Jason Ralph, and his peers at Brakebills University for magical pedagogy. But what started as a seemingly familiar chosen one setup quickly spiraled into something much stranger and far more original. Unlike traditional fantasy TV shows that play by rigid rules, The Magicians thrived on unpredictability. Seasons shifted tones drastically, from musical episodes to meta-comedy to brutal explorations of trauma. Characters frequently undermined archetypes, refusing to be heroic simply because destiny demanded it. By allowing its characters to evolve in flawed, messy, and deeply human ways, the series broke down the romanticism often attached to magic. Instead of wish fulfillment, it depicted the emotional cost of wielding power. The Magicians was a reminder that fantasy could be experimental and deeply personal while still brimming with spectacle. Attack on Titan, 2013 to 2023. A dark fantasy epic that twisted heroic destiny into tragedy. Soldiers riding a Titan in Attack on Titan. From the very beginning, Attack on Titan looked like a familiar fantasy tale of humanity uniting against monstrous invaders. Eren Yeager, Yuki Kaji in Japanese, Bryce Papenbrook in English, seemed poised to follow a classic Chosen One path, driven by revenge against the Titans that destroyed his home. However, the series never played out like standard fantasy TV shows. Instead of leaning on straightforward heroism, AOT unraveled the myth of destiny. Eren's journey became one of moral ambiguity, where freedom and destruction blurred together. By reframing its protagonist from savior to deeply conflicted anti-hero, Attack on Titan rejected the conventional fantasy narrative of the noble warrior fulfilling prophecy. Worldbuilding also played a massive role in its innovation. The Titans weren't just terrifying monsters, they were tied to political, historical, and ideological conflicts that gave the story layered depth. Attack on Titan defied tropes by turning spectacle into a meditation on cycles of violence, power, and survival, making it one of the boldest dark fantasies ever told. Warrior Nun, 2020 to 2022. A religiously infused fantasy that modernized divine mythology. Christina Tontirayung as Sister Beatrice looking serious in Warrior Nun. Warrior Nun followed Ava Silva, Alba Baptista, a young woman revived from death and unwittingly bound to a mystical halo. Instead of embracing a standard Chosen One arc, the show framed Ava's struggle as an exploration of free will, belief, and the blurred line between divine purpose and personal agency.